we're really excited for you to join us today. 8:15 in the morning. So whether you're having a meal, a cup of coffee, if like myself, you're fasting for Ramadan Mubarak. Welcome to everyone here. My name is Ryan Ross. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer here at Halcyon. And so we started this series to really add, an interesting perspective in what is, let's put it an optimistic spin on this, a very interesting time we're all living through. So many facets of our society are undergoing massive disruption right now. I mean, it is something that we see and feel in our everyday life. And at times we have just enough time and energy to get the top line, if that, right? And understand where our country is in battling COVID-19 and this enormous public health crisis that has now spawned from it an economic crisis as well. But of course, that touches every sector of our society. The issues that existed before have not gone away. And so what we've tried to do with this series is to find the innovators who are at the front lines of these different issue areas, these different industries, and talk to them about what's going on. And so today we have a panel we've been really excited to do for quite a while now, which is on education. Those of us who have children know that the education system has changed rapidly overnight. and parents have been forced to become teachers, giving so many a newfound respect for teachers and what they do on a daily basis. So we are, we wanted to talk with some of the innovators at the forefront of how we're thinking about education and learning in the 21st century to really understand what's happening and what's going on. So for those of you who are new to this series, the organization that's hosting this, Halcyon, is a nonprofit based in Washington, D.C. We supercharge social entrepreneurs and civic-minded artists with extraordinary and world-changing ideas. And the way we do this is through our fellowship program. So we actually have residential fellowship programs where these entrepreneurs will go in and we help to provide them with the resources, training, and support that they need to do incredible things. A shout out to one of our panelists, Tayo, right now, who is actually at Halcyon, holding down the fort, the skeleton crew of folks living there right now. So we're going to dive into a conversation. We'll go until about 9 o'clock today. And we'll hopefully, have some time at the end to get your questions in. So definitely begin thinking about those, and we'll end up using the chat feature. So if you want to throw them in, go ahead and do that. I've got a few questions I want to jump into with the panelists, but before we do, two quick notes. One, we'll be sending out a post-event email. So if our speakers mention a website or other resources, we'll be sending those out to you guys so you have easy access to them. So just an FYI there. And of course, the most important housekeeping thing first, we have to tell you who's on this panel. I could do it. Unfortunately or fortunately, depending on your perspective, I could probably recite every single one of these ventures, pitches, word for word, but I won't do that. I want to have them tell you a little bit about themselves and their story. So I'll first start with Tayo because he's actually at Halcyon right now. He's in the current cohort, is doing absolutely incredible work with Utiva. So Tayo, I love, by the way, the Utiva swag you've got on. It looks nice.
Thank you.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah. So my name is Tayo. Originally from Nigeria. I have had the opportunity to live and also work in 6 different countries. But interestingly, I started my life, in Nigeria, graduated, and I realized that I had finished the university to a new space. So I really struggled to find my first job for almost 2 years. I got lucky along the way, landed my job, moved from Nigeria to the US, and then realized that there is a lot of problem that we really need to fix, in Africa. So I started Utiva, majorly premised on that same reality of how do we help young people transition from school to jobs and do it faster. So currently Utiva that I lead has presence in 9 different cities or 9 different states, if you think about it that way, in Nigeria, and we just, established a little presence in Kenya. What we do majorly is to help young people learn very premium technology skills that can sustain their career for the next 15 years. So you think about skills like data science, artificial intelligence, programming, product design, And on the other side of it, also help companies that are looking to access, talents to, easily, gain access to already trained and validated, human capital. Currently, we're working with almost 110 businesses that are hiring through us, and we have a network of almost 4,000 young people that have gone through our learning programs. So that's pretty much, my story. And thanks to Halcyon for giving me a better experience, in 2020.
Well, 2020 has been an interesting year. I'm glad you'll look on it fondly.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of silver linings, I think, that are going to come out of this, and we'll get into a few of them today. Next, I want to jump from one end of the spectrum, kind of how folks are learning and really kind of getting those skills for their career as they're entering their career, to a little bit earlier in that timeline. So Oscar, I want to bring you in here. Oscar, founder of Thimble in Cohort 11. I would love to hear a little bit more about your journey and your work.
Definitely. Good morning, everyone. So my name is Oscar Pedroso, Cohort 11 at Halcyon, and originally from New York City. Currently live in Buffalo, New York, but my whole life has been in the education space. My parents immigrated to the U.S. in the late 70s, and they came here to seek a better life. And so I was first in my family to graduate from high school and college. Got a degree in math, ended up working at admissions, college admissions. So I worked within the engineering school. So I was working with a lot of kids who were going into chemical engineering, electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, any sort of engineering you could think of. And a lot of my work was really working with inner city kids and trying to plant that seed early on for them to consider going into a technical discipline. It didn't necessarily have to be engineering, but computer science, it could be biomechanics, it could be statistics. And usually that involved me having to visit classrooms. What was the most rewarding part about that is having to see these kids apply later down the line and then reading their applications and giving them a chance to experience the university. But that is what catapulted me into the ed tech space. Started a tutoring business and then an application consulting business. Didn't really like those because it was just a one-man band. I really always saw myself being part of a larger team and doing greater good in terms of impact, social impact. And then finally, I came across a group of users on one of our websites that we were creating. And a lot of these students were very interested in building robotics, or were interested in building robots and drones and all different types of technical projects, but they just didn't have the wherewithal. They didn't know where to start. They didn't know where to get the components. And so out of that, we decided to create a concept called Thimble, which is a curriculum that teaches students how to build these type of devices. So and the way we do that is through a series of hands-on kits. And then we provide professional development for the teachers, because we work with a lot of non-technical teachers who are very intimidated by this. And then we also provide support in terms of lessons and other types of resources, obviously for the students and the teachers. So happy to discuss more of that in detail through the rest of the talk here.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive in. I can tell you that my life would have been very different if I had, circuits and robotics to build as a child. But I ended up as a political science major, which probably wasn't as useful of a degree. But by luck and happenstance, I ended up getting to work with awesome founders every day, and so that's really fantastic. And speaking of awesome founders, let me just bring in our third panelist here, Stacy Wilson, who is just an absolute treasure, one of my favorite Halcyon fellows. They're all my favorites, but Stacy's especially one of my favorites, founder in our 5th cohort. Stacy, you want to talk a little bit about your work?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Halcyon. Thank you, Ryan, for having me. So my name is Stacy Wilson. I am the founder of a company called PYT. That does not stand for Pretty Young Thing. And when I started this, I was definitely a lot younger. But it stands for Pay Your Tuition, and we help students fund the last amount of money that they need to graduate from college. And so I know a lot of people hear the story that student loan debt and how bad student loan debt is, but we were able to find out and figure out that there was a larger problem, that student loan debt in no degree was actually a worse off problem than student loan debt. And so we started focusing on ways that we can fill those funding gaps to make sure that students can complete. So we work with the banks and finding very low cost to no cost dollars to fill those gaps, whether there's loans, scholarships, or a product that we created called Loanerships. It's a credit building scholarship. So it helps students build credit at the same time with the same dollars that they use for their scholarship. We use those dollars to help build their credit. And so we found that that's been really helpful so that students will have some form of credit once they do graduate as well. So we put the scholarship dollars to use in two ways. And then was tapped on the shoulder about a year and a half ago to come to the Department of Education to work on a strategic mission called the Next Gen Project. And that's the next generation of how we pay for college. And so we literally sat around and get to daydream about how we could reimagine how students pay for college, how they go, how do we give them better information so they can make better choices to achieve their career goals or their lifestyle goals. So depending upon what makes them happy, how can we show them different roadmaps or strategy maps is what we call it, to ensure that people are borrowing less and getting better outcomes. And so that's been really exciting because everything that I think I've ever wanted to do in startup space, I'm able to magnify that work at the federal level. So it's been really exciting.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love the tap on the shoulder. That's it. That's all you got to do. You just someone taps you on your shoulder one day, and then it's done. But obviously, it speaks to you and your work. But your work and everyone's work has changed recently. So if you're just joining us, we're really diving in with 3 Halcyon fellows who are at the forefront of kind of how we're thinking about education and learning, especially not only in the 21st century, but in a post-COVID environment. So Stacy, maybe I'll start with you. I think that your work has focused a lot, obviously, on how we're financing education, how we're supporting students, especially around higher education. Things have moved very fast, and there's been a lot of changes really fast. I check on my my student loans. I have quite a bit of student loans, and I don't have to pay a dime right now. I don't have to pay any interest, and this is something that was not unthinkable, but certainly not in the kind of center of the policy space just 2 months ago. So talk to me about kind of what's been changing on the ground in your day to day since kind of the crisis really hit.
Sure, absolutely. So we start at 6 in the morning and go to 11 p.m. ever since the COVID-19 sort of shutdown happened, and it was immediately with the first stimulus bill that all student loan payments as well as interest being accrued would just halt any garnishments, anything that where student loan was ruining people's lives. Everything sort of came to a halt, which we are kind of excited about because for the first time the portfolio is sort of at a standstill. So that's $1.5 trillion that everyone keeps hearing the big number of student loan debt. That large portfolio is sort of at a standstill for the first time ever. And so this has given us an opportunity to now take a look at the portfolio and really figure out what's in there, meaning what's actually good assets, what will we never recover as a nation, what could be possibly written off, who do we write it off for? I mean, it's conversations all day about what group do we help relieve first? And so the best thing to do was just take a time out for everyone and just really figure out where we as a nation maybe have misstepped in the way that we finance and pay for college, and how much debt we've allowed people to take out, as well as the people who did not retain and finish. What are the data points that we could find from the first time they filled out a FAFSA form in 12th grade? What is it about them now that caused maybe a default, and if we can see any trends so that we can now go back and figure out what we can do from the federal government side to make sure that people are properly thinking about their future. And so right now with everything with COVID-19, the portfolio is on a timeout, is on a break, and we're able to really do a deep dive in to figure out how do we go forward when we do come back off this COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, certainly a time for innovation, which is great. And I think that, it's a good segue to a little bit of the work that Tayo's doing because, the education system is going to change. There were a lot of pieces on the board already, but certainly, we're about to see a major just economic shift in terms of what jobs people have, how people are being trained. Tayo, you're in the trenches. You're a founder, as you said, you've kind of worked with 4,000 different learners. Tell me a little bit about how your life has changed. How has the work of your company changed since the crisis really hit?
Yeah, mic check. Okay. So speaking of silver lining, I mean, I will try to be a little bit positive, but also be a little bit very realistic of what we're experiencing. It's been an interesting time, right? And also very challenging. I mean, challenging because the companies that we work with are really experiencing a lot of, troubles and challenges here and there. And we are some sort of like human capital development partners to some organizations that are, trusting us to help them accelerate, the growth in terms of, human capital growth of the folks that work with them at the lower end, of the income hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
Also for the customers, it's been a little bit a tough experience for them in some ways. Think about it this way. Currently, about 80% of the people that live in major cities are currently working from home, and 60% of Nigerians some sort of access, internet from their office. So it's a challenge of, now that I'm working from home, what is the priority for my data consumption? Is it going to be for learning a new skill, or is it going to be for, keeping the work that I'm doing and making sure that I don't lose my job? And that makes it a little bit also challenging for people that are that lower end, of the income hierarchy. So I will say that that's like the tough experience. And one of the things that we are doing is also to be a little bit thoughtful of how we are building resilience into the organization that we lead, and also the model that we built around how we deliver value. So we are some sort of changing the entire model every time. So we are reaching out to the organizations to say, hey, we have learning programs that are available virtually. Are you happy to pay at installment for the first time, for organizations to pay at installment over the next 2 years, so that, they don't find it a big trouble to provide values to, the people at that level that we serve.
So you're saying that basically you've shifted a little bit from having more upfront payments to actually installments to make it a little bit less of a financial burden to access the resources.
Exactly, got you. One of the things that we've also done is to also move completely off. I mean, we've been forced by the pressure to move offline, online. But one of the things that we've also done is to help people that don't have access to internet to, learn remotely without internet. And the way we are doing that is to put all the content in an encrypted device so that we can protect, the rights of the faculty that produces content. At the same time, ship an encrypted device down to the houses of, most of the people that we work with, and give them the opportunity to work remote and learn remotely, without the pressure of data. So that's like the dynamic. So we have to keep innovating every time. In fact, yesterday, we just realized that many of our trainers, the day they have to come online to train, their internet some sort of mess up. So we are, also helping them to pre-record the content and stream it live. So, I mean, it's like adjusting to the realities and making sure that you're finding the right balance, watching the data to make sure that you're providing real value in the long run. And that's some sort of like the position where we are right now.
Yeah. So I know we had talked earlier, and I think you had mentioned that kind of the rough split before the crisis of virtual to in-person in terms of your training was about 60% virtual, 40% in-person, right? So there was a significant amount of virtual, and now a lot less in-person. What's been the shift for your learners? I mean, have they been able to kind of get the same level of value out of this, or has it been challenging for them as well?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things that we also try as much as possible to do, understanding that we can get better results if we understand the psychology of the students that are going through the program. I mean, because from day one, if you believe that you're not going to get value, then it's going to be a trouble for you to really get the value. So we spend a lot of time, hosting free master classes on YouTube, on Zoom, just free, to some sort of prepare their minds mentally and provide, virtual support through basic platforms like WhatsApp. So if you miss a part of the learning program and you need to speak with a data coach, or you need to speak with a product coach or a design coach, someone is available to have a WhatsApp call with you and walk you through, any piece of the learning program that you miss. So it's some sort of like being heavy on support, or making sure that the support is available to anyone that is learning. Interestingly, we have achieved 100% success rate for those that come into the program, but the numbers of those that are getting into some sort of enrolling into the program has dropped, but the completion rate has not reduced, but the enrollment rate has dropped. And I some sort of like understand why that also happens. It might be prioritization, feeding as against learning, working as against, studying in terms of where do you burn your data, access to internet for some people. But with this new model of shipping the device to their homes, we're quite very positive that offers some value, because we're also shipping the device at no cost, right? Because we just built a partnership with an organization that is some sort of like the largest delivery service in Nigeria, and they're happy to also, ship the device within 24 hours. So we're telling our clients and our customers that you don't have to pay a dime, get the device, learn the first course. If you're happy to move on, then you can pay. We'll send you the passkey to access the other courses. Just helping them, I would call this like cheerleading to inspire people to learn.
That's really, really exciting. And, the inspiring to learn, again, a really good transition. I want to, Oscar, kind of bring the conversation to a little bit of a different part of the education space, which is more the K-12 space, especially in the United States. Again, parents everywhere have had to become teachers very recently, and kind of what school has shifted in a really stark way, given that people can't be in the classroom anymore. So you have a really unique kind of product and journey. I'd love to hear like what's been going on with Thimble, and kind of what has the COVID environment kind of pushed you guys to working on and doing.
Yeah, definitely. I think for us, our world was turned a little bit upside down. The funny thing is, when we first started Thimble, we were working with homeschool families initially, and we moved into the school market because we just thought there was a larger opportunity there. The consumer market can tend to be a little noisy because our product really focuses on industry level engineering and computer science. And usually what you'll find in the market is there are a lot of toys. And so it was really hard for parents to distinguish, toy versus a real tool that could teach your kids about Internet of Things, robotics, cybersecurity, and so forth. So we just thought that having a curriculum for schools would be a lot better. Well, so we did that for a good year and a half, and of course COVID happens, and we're like, oh boy, school's closed. So we had no choice but to revert back to working again with parents. And my first inclination was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And I don't want to be seen as this entrepreneur that's bouncing back and forth between markets, but it actually has turned out to be a blessing in disguise, because both markets both the parent and the school market are experiencing a lot of challenges. Parents are trying to figure out how to teach their kids at home. These are parents that are probably used to being workaholics and don't necessarily have the time and experiences and the resources to teach their kids how to teach, the full stack of subjects. And schools obviously don't know or don't have certain remote learning resources and the bandwidth to be able to provide to their student population. So where we've come in is we decided to reach out to a few schools, and we reached out to a few parents. We figured we have customers on both sides. Let's talk to them and figure out what's going on. And then let's try it as much as possible to just have a conversation and see if there's any way we can help. I think when you approach it that way, it's amazing the type of conversations you'll have, whether it's a teacher or an administrator. So on the school side, we just heard that there was just so much uncertainty and a lack of communication, and that wasn't really being channeled across the entire school. So that created a sense of panic, and no one really wanted to talk for the first 3 weeks that all of this happened. And then now that there's this new normal happening, I think there's a lot more in the pipeline as far as like, okay, what's going to happen now? How do we prepare for this in the future? How do we build out the infrastructure so that we're prepared to teach our kids? And parents, having conversations with parents has been interesting as well, because we've had conversations with parents who send their kids to public schools, private schools, and charter schools. And each of those segments of parents are experiencing different challenges. Private schools, for example, I've actually talked to a few teachers that have been furloughed recently because some parents are refusing to pay tuition because they paid for the in-person experience of sending their kids to private school, whereas now, it's all remote. And so a lot of these teachers are being either furloughed or laid off and are looking for opportunities. So we've been able to run online workshops for these homeschool families where someone can go to our website, they buy one of our kits, and then we include a certain number of workshops with that kit. Each workshop is live and is taught by a live instructor. And some of these instructors are actually some of these furloughed teachers. And it's great because a couple of them are digital electronics teachers, which is like perfect. So the experience that we're trying to provide for the students at home is trying to get it as close as possible to an in-class experience. So the workshops are usually 7 to 12 students, and they're from all over the country. So last night we did one, there was a student from California, Illinois, New York, DC. And my goal is to be able to continue to do that and create some other fun engagements in there. We just started contests so that the students can compete against one another around creative projects, just to keep them occupied. So all of that has been one whirlwind, and that's been the last 6-7 weeks that we just had to sort of jump ship and figure out what we were going to do during this time.
Yeah, hey, there's certainly a lot of value in being nimble with that. Let me dig in a little bit deeper here, and I want to go around the horn a little bit on this one. Oscar, again, just kind of staying on, what's happening with our K-12 system now. We're going to come out of this at some point in time. What do you see as kind of how the world looks different afterwards, right? What are the things, when we hit a point, and hopefully this is sooner rather than later, where we return to some level of normalcy? How is the education system going to have to change in terms of how we're thinking about educating our students to, kind of for the future? What do you predict, given that you're on the forefront of this?
I think there's going to be a little more legislation, and I think people will also be a lot more vocal about what needs to happen in the education space. I think the education space gets a bad rap because, aside from being slow moving and slow to adapt to current trends, I think people have been complacent with how things are running in the education space. And now that you have this pandemic and it completely changed everything, I think it's just going to bring a little more urgency to what actually needs to get done. And that's going to start off with what core criteria do schools need so that this doesn't happen again. And a lot of the schools I've been talking to are now preparing for the future by having some kind of disaster emergency relief funds in case this happens again, that they have a backup plan and aren't confronted with lack of testing, lack of homework assignments, lack of progression. I've been talking to a few elementary school parents, and they're concerned that their kids are going to be 3 to 4 months behind when they enter the next school year. And so a lot of that is just, there's nothing in place for any of that. And so I think we're going to see a lot more around that. It's going to stem down from the federal government. I think it's going to start with the stimulus, with the $13 billion stimulus, where a lot of that is going towards building out infrastructure and providing more support for special needs students, for example, that are being left in the dust right now. Mm-hmm. So I think we're going to see more of that, and I'm looking forward to it because I think the education space needs that.
Yeah, and speaking of things shifting, I mean, things have already shifted in how we're financing education, Stacy. But I imagine that those shifts, those changes are not done. I mean, as you, I think, talked about in the Department of Education right now, looking at like what the future is. It's an election year. There's so many things that are going on. And there have been a lot of kind of big proposals around how we're financing education. So, just looking at crystal ball, like what do you see as the future of kind of what paying for kind of higher education looks like moving forward, and especially kind of what effect COVID will have on that?
I think Oscar said it perfectly, is that the fact that we were able to just make the portfolio come to a abrupt timeout shows that there is opportunity to address some of the issues around student loan debt. So that I think we were able to show that it's possible. To your point, how are we going to think through it further now that everything's sort of at a standstill? How are we going to again determine what groups and economic classes find relief first? But I do believe that with the rise of like a lot of the boot camps and alternative learning style schools for people who are looking to get retrained and reskilled, or maybe even look at other alternatives versus the traditional path of college, that the federal funding currently is high enough from a Pell Grant recipient to be able to attend one of those boot camps where you should not be going into debt. And so I think that people will start to realize that the amount of money that you do have provided to you from a federal level is enough money to pay for some alternative types of learning. And so I think that the Department of Education should be very mindful to get those types of alternative schools accredited so that people can use their federal funding for those different learning styles.
Sounds like some of the things, Tayo, you're building. I want to kind of push the same question to you, but before I do, I want to flag for everyone that we're going to jump into audience Q&A very shortly. So if you've got questions, please go ahead and send them in the chat, and we'll go ahead and I'll just kind of moderate the questions, give you a shout out. And we'll really try to make sure that we can get as many as possible in. But Tayo, I think that what Stacy said is kind of really interesting when we're looking at what the future is going to look like. I mean, there are going to be what 10 years ago would be very odd and different, but now has become a lot more common. The more training type of infrastructure that isn't going through kind of a traditional college. You've obviously built a company that's doing incredible work in this space. What do you see as, do you think that COVID has an impact on, kind of the outlook for your company, the outlook for kind of the sector that you're working in as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the easiest, okay, my mic is on. So one of the things to consider is that when the problem is everyone's problem, right? It's pretty much very easy to start to think out of the box. And that's one of the things that we have started to experience. I mean, we built a platform for virtual internship, and it was pretty much a struggle to get people to use it for the first, 1 year. And, within the COVID shutdown, we started to see people jump on the platform because there is a need to bridge the gap. It's very difficult to get the government's attention to think about human capital development, but now it's somehow interesting. Then the government is willing to talk to you about, hey, how do I train 50,000 people that are unemployed, on the street? How do I get them to learn the premium skills that you're talking about? And that's the interesting thing. Moving forward, one of the things that I would say is that we all need to be very open to, and just like you mentioned, be nimble, right? We all need to be open to new models and new ways of doing things. Both educators and also the learners and the organizations that are hiring these talents. But from the educators, spectrum of things, what is ultimate is, as you're changing as you're inventing new models, you want to be able to quickly measure performance, because moving out of COVID-19 shutdown, what is going to change is everyone would have to start to make decisions based on what is important to them. And, the universities will realize that most people would say that, hey, during the shutdown, I learned on this platform and it was quite valuable to me. Why would I want to spend my time, in the university? And that's one of the experiences that we are seeing. People are saying, I pretty much, just watch YouTube videos and I learned to use Microsoft Excel. I mean, I spent 4 years in the university and I did not even learn this thing at all. And, everyone coming back to the reality of self-evaluation, and even the parents for the kids, right? Evaluating, saying, these are the things that my kids don't pretty much know. I pay a lot of money in school, and now I spend time with them at home, and I'm even doing a better job than the teachers. And everyone would just come to the reality of self-evaluating. And that is why educators need to rethink the entire model that we are, inventing this time, and measure performance quickly as against, the ultimate objective of what we are trying to achieve.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point. So we're going to jump to audience Q&A. Before we do that, I want to bring in my colleague, Sam, who I think has a few quick thoughts this morning. Wednesday morning thoughts. How you doing, Sam?
I'm doing well. How are you, Ryan?
I'm doing great.
I'm good. I'm happy to be here. My isolation pod has moved into the bread making portion of quarantine, so I'm very happy to be.
You're leveling up. That's fantastic.
Yeah, definitely. Well, hi everyone. Like Ryan said, I'm Sam. I work at Halcyon. I hope that you're all doing well and eating bread if you have it and can. Thank you, Stacy, Tayo, and Oscar for really a fascinating conversation. And I'm also eager to get to the question and answer portion of the day. But I do want to speak on behalf of Halcyon a little bit and say that we're super grateful for you all being here today. Thank you to all of you for joining us for all of our virtual programs. It has been such a joy to have these discussions with you all. And we really, really couldn't do it without your support. And we also couldn't do any of this without our community's financial support. For those of you who don't know, Halcyon is a 501c3 nonprofit, which means that we rely entirely on donations. So if you are in the place to give, please consider donating to Halcyon. $5, $10, whatever you would normally spend on an Uber to get to us. Everything helps at this time so we can continue providing this programming that we all love so much. I really, really believe right now, especially, it's the time to fund the world that we want to see when all of this is over. So I hope that you all consider Halcyon when you think of that. And I want to thank you all again for your time today. And I look forward to seeing you all at the next Breakfast with Halcyon. So back to you, Ryan. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, we had a really exciting day yesterday. We had an awesome partnership with the Georgetown Business Improvement District, where we're able to raise some money yesterday through Giving Tuesday to kind of support the work of Halcyon in supporting the startups here, the founders here, but of course also the workers in Georgetown as well, and making sure that people who are now out of work have some funds to make sure that they can put food on the table. So Sam, really appreciate your work in that, and everyone who participated and donated that. A huge, huge thank you. All right, so let's get to some questions. We're not going to have time to get to everyone's question. I apologize in advance. Kathy just sent in a great question, so I'll jump right into it. Kathy wrote, Oscar, it sounds like you'll be able to pivot really quickly, but most K-12 systems are struggling. So what role do organizations like yourself, and I'm going to go ahead, these, kind of interesting startups with cool and interesting products, how can they help to solve this problem for these schools?
Yeah, thank you, Kathy. I think there are a couple ways that we're pursuing this at the moment. And one, we've partnered with National Grid. For those of you who are unaware of National Grid, they're a utility provider in the New York and Massachusetts area. And they have a variety of education initiatives that they fund through their corporate social responsibility department. We've done something like this before, but one of the first things I did when all of this happened was reach out to them to see if there were ways we could partner together. And so one of the things we're talking about right now is they're interested in sponsoring a number of public school districts in the area. And so what that entails is using some of our kits, bringing it into delivering those to students wherever they live. We just delivered a shipment last week to an apartment complex, and a large number of the students that live there are using these kits and then going on our workshops. And so that's all being sponsored by National Grid. So that's been super interesting for us. And so we're going to continue to see if there are other companies that do that. And then I think the other thing is just being able to offer like free workshops. There's like a fine line there, right? Because at the end of the day, we're a business, right? But one of the things that we wanted to do as a company is when someone purchased our kit, we now include 4 free workshops in there. And that does a couple of things for us. It helps us build a relationship with the school and the students. And if they like what they see, they can continue to subscribe to some of the other workshops that are a little more advanced. But that has been nice in the sense that not only do we have students, but we also get teachers as well. And we get parents. With the parent scenario, we get parents working alongside their kids. We know we're all dying to get out of the house, but the one thing we could do is create that family bonding moment around that maker, like create something. And then for schools, how do you continue to train those teachers that are probably not sure what to do right now? So, but I'm very optimistic about the corporate model because I think there's something there.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I want to try and get in 2 more quick questions before we hit 9 o'clock. So Tayo, really quickly, we have a question coming in from Jacqueline. It's a long question, so I'm going to jump to the chase at the end, where she asks about basically what are some best practices for e-learning in areas with limited tech capacity. I know you've been doing a lot of work in this. I know you kind of mentioned a product, which I believe is called the Nucleus, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that and what you've seen in areas with limited technology capacity.
Mm-hmm. And I know that this might be like a very sophisticated approach to making sure that people get your content. One of the things that we want to do in the future is to have to get into the hardware business, where we have a small, mini tab that has all our content, and you only have to struggle about you only have to struggle with electricity and forget about data. And one of the things that you can do, because I actually read the question, is to get if they have access to mobile phones, right? You can get memory cards of large capacity and put the content in the memory cards and ship it to them, if that is something that would work. And that also depends on the sizes of the content that you're looking to ship. For us, the size can be as large as 30 gig to 150 gig. For what you're looking to ship to the beneficiaries of your program, might not be more than 10 gig. If you can get very small memory cards that people can insert into their phone. And we are also experimenting with that, because we have a major state in Nigeria that wants us to some sort of train people on communication, on networking, on how to create their LinkedIn profiles. And we want to do this in form of like voice over, voice notes, and put it in very small memory cards. But we don't have to encrypt that, and we can share. And the good thing is that we can brand that Utiva, and just help people to access it for free, and it can go viral. Believing that, we can also use that approach, just like what Oscar said, to, to give back to the community and hopefully, also capture some value in return. I don't know if that helps, but you can think of voice notes, if you can do simple voice notes and also reduce the capacity of the, the videos in terms of, shrinking the video size and all that.
Yeah, fantastic. Jacqueline said that's super helpful, so that's awesome. Thank you. Stacy, the last word goes to you with the biggest kind of question, which is kind of put on your optimist hat right now. Silver lining from this. What's the silver lining coming out of this? And you can take it in any direction you want as it relates to the education system. How is the education system going to come out of this stronger? As we look towards the future?
Yeah, and I think that one of the biggest issues is that with student loan debt is that the cost, of course, was the number one. People kept thinking like it's Sally Mae and they're blaming on the banks, but really the universities and the cost is the driver of student loan debt. And so universities are going to have to take a look at how they educate students. Students have already started to rethink if they're going to re-enroll in the fall, or look at different alternatives. So if they want to retain and keep their students, they're going to need to find ways to adapt to this environment, bring down costs, which will hopefully put people in a better place anyway, so that it should be less debt.
Yeah, and I think if I were to summarize a point I think all three of you have made in this conversation, it really is that we're in a really creative time right now, and that's something that I think we're beginning to rethink a lot of systems and what the status quo looked like. And so it's not at all to minimize the significant pain that's going on, to say as well that there are going to be many silver linings. There are going to be many ways that things are strengthened when we come out on the other side of this. So with that, I want to really thank Oscar, Stacy, Tayo. You guys have been absolutely fantastic. It's such a pleasure to work with you, to just be around you, and to live vicariously through your work. I want to thank everyone for joining us today early. Hopefully you've had some good breakfast, some good coffee. We'll be back with our Breakfast with Halcyon in 2 weeks. So we're going to be in 2 weeks on May 20th, having a conversation around technology and accessibility, and how that's going to potentially really change as we're moving towards the future. So we have 3 incredible fellows who we'll be talking to then. I also want to flag that next Friday, we have a virtual happy hour with Arts Lab fellow Alex Braden. I'm actually really excited for this. It's going to be a digital variety show of soundscapes, music, and absurdities. Yes, literally the word absurdities is in the description, which how could you not show up? That are set to ease the mind during tumultuous times. So when we follow up, we'll send a link to that. I will absolutely be there. I think it's going to be fantastic. So we hope to see you. We've got a full May events calendar coming up of a lot of great content that will hopefully keep you inspired and engaged while we're all quarantining right now. So we're going to bring this to a close. It's 9 o'clock. Thank you, everyone. We'll leave it open for a few minutes in case you want to use the chat feature to talk with some folks. Thank you again, Stacy, Oscar, Tayo, and we'll see you guys in a few weeks.